All right. Well, hi, hello, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Jess,
And I'm Scott.
and we are going to get into our exciting content very soon. But first, we just wanted to take a minute to walk through a few housekeeping points that are going to help you get the most out of your time with us here today. Scott, where should we start?
Yeah, so first I want to draw everyone's attention over to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the best place to get involved, get interactive, and post all your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. In fact, why don't you find that tab now and give it a test run by saying hi to the community here with us today. And as a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during the session. Don't forget that a browser refresh should clear up any of the more common issues with slides or audio, but if not, just shoot a message in that questions tab and our team will be there to help.
I'm so glad you started with the questions tab, Scott, because I am going to take us all just one little hop over to the handouts tab. So the handouts tab is going to be absolutely full of cool resources and takeaways. You are going to want to check that out. It'll help you follow up on this exciting conversation that we are about to have. And in even better news, it is not just awesome content that we are giving away today. We also have a $250 Amazon gift card that we will be giving away as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here in live attendance during the webinar, and all winners do need to meet the prize terms and conditions. But if you're not sure what those are, we have them linked for you right there in that handouts tab that we were just chatting about. So just click in, scroll down, you'll find them all waiting for you there.
And we have one more exciting prize to tell you about. So today we'll be giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to the best question asked during the webinar. So keep in mind that the team will review all of the questions after the webinar wraps, which means that even if your question does not get read out in our live Q&A, there's still a chance to win. And as always, we'll reach out via email to our lucky winner after the event.
All right, well, I think that was it for all the housekeeping stuff. We are primed, we are ready to rock. Let's get to our webinar.
Hi, I'm Phil Kurz, contributing editor at TV Tech Magazine and tvtech.com. I'm here with Costa Nichols, Executive Team Strategy Advisor at TELUS Alliance. We're here to discuss today's topic, taking the deep dive on content management and monetization. I want to tell those of you in the audience that we will be taking your questions throughout today's presentation, so feel free to ask away as they come to mind. Costa, thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here, Phil. It's an honor to join you here today, and hope that everybody who's joined the webinar today enjoys it. And again, ask questions. We'll do our best, of course, to answer during. If we can't answer during, like the kind of instruction said, we will follow up after the webinar. But really looking forward to it.
Great. Well, thank you. So, content owners want to monetize their content. That's a given. But
Mhm.
preparing content for distribution across multiple platforms and multiple geographies adds costs. What are some of the biggest pain points that this creates?
Right. So, Phil, even before we even start to kind of talk down that track, and pardon the pun, we should define what we mean by content, right? Is it a fully delivered episode or a series of a sitcom or drama? Is it sports content, historical news, archival footage? Are we talking about stuff that's still sitting on tapes? Or was it ingested over a decade ago in some motion JPEG, AVI, or .mov file? So in the simplest form, when you're talking about monetizing content, it really starts with identifying what you have and what you might need to do with it, right? And then there are other functions that you might need to perform. So format detection, decoding and verifications to make sure that everything is kind of in right for what your normalization standards are. Then analyze the content, look for any errors, process it, correct any errors, or do any restoration. If you wanted to add alternative languages, rewrap the content, re-encode the format, or even upscale it. So there's quite a lot of tasks that you really kind of have to look at, when you're talking about preparing your content for distribution or monetization.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the different types of content because I want to drill down on three separate types of content. Let's start off with live content. What are some of the bigger hurdles that must be overcome to repurpose live content uh, with the goal of driving greater profitability?
Right. So with live content, the most valuable piece of any aspect of it is the metadata, right? So your archive, really, you've got to be able to break down and understand every bit of content to the five W's, right? The who, the what, the where, the why, and the when. But you can imagine that tagging that information at some point becomes kind of untenable for a human being. And you just have to stop. Good enough is just good enough. But a great example of kind of the challenge here is, so you look at some historical archive data, and let's just randomly make something up. A shot of, Secret Service agent on the White House lawn with a dog in front of the driveway. Now, if a person is tagging the metadata, they will put down Secret Service, they'll put down dog, they'll put White House, driveway. If you're lucky, you'll get some other details like rainy day, sunny day, type of car, whatever. But, imagine now if you had a process that would allow you to tag every bit of detail that's in that shot, including, the Secret Service agent is wearing Nike shoes. The cars parked in the driveway are a Mercedes and a Land Rover. Then that content, because of the ability to tag all that extra metadata, is then searchable. So if somebody is doing, let's say a documentary about White House dogs or president's pets, that's an easy one to come up. If that content could then be used for, let's say, Nike protecting democracy for 25 years or something like that, having that data that's part of the content makes it so much more marketable, not just in the midterm, but also the long term.
Right. And as relates to live content, I would guess there's also the challenge, especially if you're in a geography like Europe, let's say, where you're seeking to grow your profits by distributing your content to multiple different countries with multiple different languages. That must be a major factor trying to accommodate the speakers of different languages on the fly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you look at some of the stuff that we've talked about so far. Whether it's live content or even in file-based canned content. You need to identify what you have, and you need to identify what you need to do with it. But when you start talking about having this content go out to different geographies, and possibly even to the point that it's going to be viewed by people of different cultural values, etc., you have to be careful about what you send out. So usually canned content is better because it's more scripted, and you have better information about what you might need to cut out or leave in. However, when you're looking at live content, especially for looking at profanity or looking at any kind of political ideologies that might be expressed, you have to be able to kind of look out for that, and depending where it's going, edit that out or offer clean versions so that it can be at least identified and edited out wherever the end result's going to be. And that's not even talking about profanity, nudity, watershed, etc. There's so many different dimensions about how content has to be prepared depending on what its target's going to be.
Right. Wardrobe malfunctions.
That's it.
But let's talk now. Let's get back to the file-based content. So with respect to content that's already in the can, so to speak, you mentioned the importance of metadata. I was wondering if maybe you could talk about, in terms of workflow, that to date has required a lot of manual intervention to identify everything that you said, the Secret Service agent, the shoes they're wearing, etc. Where do we stand on maybe deriving greater profits from those with the help of technology?
Right. Now, that's a great topic. And, of course, when we're talking about technology, as it's 2024, September, almost October, AI is a huge, huge, huge topic and a buzzword. So I'm going to have to drop some AI discussion into this. Now, I'm usually a bit of a skeptic when it comes to that, and AI being used in a creative context in production. But where I feel it offers tremendous value is, remember earlier that I mentioned a human being can only tag so much metadata to a particular asset, right? Before, it just doesn't become tenable in the amount of time that they need to do the job. AI can go into much greater detail, including identifying every word, every character, every detail in every segment as metadata. So therefore, you have a much richer starting point when it comes to tagging your material that you can monetize, again, either in the midterm, short term, or long term.
So then there is the archived content, stuff that may not be top of mind, but may have a financial value associated with it, especially if you could get to it. Why don't you talk about how technology is making it easier to monetize that content?
Right. Phil, from kind of like a video perspective, it's a lot easier to imagine, right? If you go back 25 or 30 years, a lot of the material that we were looking at was shot in SD, so 720 by 480. And if you want to talk about PAL, it's 720 by 586 and interlaced, right? Today, most broadcasters have standardized on 1080p, or in some cases even 4K. So that's 4 times the resolution at 2160, right? Up converting content to higher resolutions and including HDR is definitely a worthwhile endeavor, especially if you're looking at, well, how can I make this content more commercially attractive, depending on how you're going to distributing, having the highest quality. Even if you have to go down from that, the end result is always better than delivering content in its native resolution that is a little bit feral. So on the audio side, outside of video, it's just as interesting. You could be going from mono to doubled up mono tracks to stereo, 5.1, 7.1 to Atmos, MPEG-H, immersive audio. And that's just to get to kind of, modern types of resolutions for your content. Of course, there's a lot of different types of steps that you might need to take, kind of going between a format that you already have as opposed to ingesting natively from tape and ending up to your new normalized standard. You might have a lot of stuff, like we mentioned earlier, that you might need to transcode, but there are definitely tools that'll get you there. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those as we kind of move on.
Okay, well, now the industry must increasingly produce and distribute to support immersive audio. Broadcasters, for instance, are deploying next-gen TV with AC4 support in the US and MPEG-H elsewhere. And that must complicate the process of prepping content for distribution, as well. So could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So for immersive audio, you need to provide the metadata so that the rendering device at the edge can assemble the audio experience. And that's going to be your television set, your sound bar, actually your ear pods, your computer. They all have, or these days, all of them have some form of Atmos or immersive audio or audio experience that come with it, right? So this means upgrading your delivery infrastructure as a broadcaster to accommodate serial ADM metadata. But if you've taken the step towards IP 2110, it's certainly the right direction to be taking. But however, you can also deliver SADM with AES3 interfaces, so there are options. Now, in addition to delivering the essence type and the metadata, you also need authoring tools. The authoring tools allow you to kind of create the experience. So I like to think of, well, how do you author an immersive audio next generation experience. It's almost a little bit like back in the early 2000s. I don't know if you ever used, kind of DVD authoring software where you had your video clips and you had to kind of create the chapters, you had to put the backgrounds in. If you had any additional languages, you put that stuff in, and it kind of created an experience for the user that was going to watch that DVD and select a certain number of things that are going to be attributed to the, let's call it the viewing experience. Authoring of, next generation audio, or specifically for, whether it's Atmos or MPEG-H, is almost similar, right? You kind of laid the bed, you decide the bed, and the bed is the objects and the audio. And then you also decide, the dialogue and whatever else might be associated with it, and it can also include leveling. So now when the person on the receiving end, on the device that's going to be rendering that, selects, well, I want to listen to, the 5.1 audio. However, I might want to listen to the French dialogue as opposed to the English dialogue. Or if it's a sporting event, I want to listen to, the kind of Patriots audio coverage as opposed to the Dolphins, commentators. So you can really personalize the experience based on the selection that you have on the rendering device, and that makes it a much more personalized, overall experience for the user. So we have solutions in Telos Alliance that will allow for authoring of these types of, next generation audio experiences, both for the linear acoustic brands and the Junger audio brands. So, that's kind of the, the things that you have to kind of look at as far as how I'm going to be changing my infrastructure and what new different things I need to do in order to deliver that next generation audio experience.
I would guess that it also factors into the audio workflow when it comes to next gen TV, but there are other capabilities to help you personalize that audio even further beyond just what language you might select. Things like audio, descriptive audio tracks to describe the action, but even the ability. This may not be such a big deal. I mean, in terms of the workflow, I don't know. Correct me, but for the viewer to be able to raise let's say the background sound, the ball game, and minimize the commentator, or vice versa, or things along those lines. So that must also complicate to a degree the workflow for content prep, I'm guessing.
Kind of. I mean, the nice thing about it is, because don't forget, you are sending all the deessence types plus the metadata. So what the end device that needs to kind of build or render that experience, it's got everything that it needs to kind of create that experience. It's not like now in the production facility, I decided I'm going to bring down center and boost left and right. And now no matter what the end device is, they can only do so much about restoring that center channel. Because of the way that audio is now being handled and delivered, you actually have everything there that you need to assemble and personalize the experience how you want it. It's a really better end result.
Sure. And then we'll get off of this after this last question, I promise, but related to next gen TV as well. Broadcasters already have a lot of content that they've broadcast, and I can envision a situation where they may wish to make some of that available in next gen TV, in the future, and that also must add new sorts of elements that have to be dealt with to prepare that content for air, whether it's audio or video, and how do they do that economically so they're not eating into their potential profits?
Right. So the best way to kind of look at that is having solutions that will automate some of the, I guess, tasks or manual work that would have had to happen. So, start off with your kind of archive and your short-term and mid-term file store, and render whatever content you're going to be playing to take advantage of next generation audio delivery as an automated task in the background, if you haven't already normalized all of your content. Or at the very, very edge, you have a processing unit that can adapt for, whether it's traditional delivery and up convert to whatever next generation format you need to deliver, and can kind of do some of that in real time as it's delivering the signal. And again, there are, and we have solutions that will do that kind of stuff.
Just a reminder to our audience, we will be taking your questions if you have any, so feel free to submit them. Thank you. So getting back to it here, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about media asset management systems. Most content owners likely have MAMs in place, especially for storage, probably of more near-term content, maybe not the archival bit, but regardless, my question is, how adaptable are these systems when it comes to integrating the new tools that might be needed to automate some of this content refresh that we've been discussing?
Okay, so this is the part where what I'm about to say is going to cause people to yell at their screens, especially if you've kind of had to put a project to implement media asset management system, or any kind of archive or playout solution. These are generally long, drawn out projects that have to accommodate a lot of development and personalization, but if there's one part of the industry that's adaptable, it's kind of definitely the media asset management and delivery part of it. That being said, it's the same part of the industry that deals with very specific and automated workflows that people have spent tens of thousands of hours developing. But in general, a platform can be dropped in, and with the addition of some development and professional services, made part of an automated process or workflow. And even at a bare minimum, all media asset management systems today can work with hot folders where you drop something in and, it's crunched and something new is spit out. So if we look at it as far as, automating processes and adding something new, this part of the industry is pretty well developed to be able to cater to that. And as far as consequences, when it comes down to, what's the cost of not doing something? You lose viewers, you lose ad revenue, you lose subscription revenue. How does that stack to your human resources? Do you force extra workloads on them? Do you burn people out? Do you lose people? You really kind of need to look at purchasing solutions that allow you to do more with the staff that you have and the resources that you have. That's really the better route, especially if the return on an investment for these systems is short and compelling. So if you can show that, within 6 months workflow, you can fund a system like this, that is, half of a person over the cost of a year. And that investment is certainly worth its return if you look that you're going to be doing this for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right, and that kind of flows into what I was going to ask you. I'm sure how much content typically must be repurposed for distribution on other platforms or to other geographies plays into the strategy that, to determining what best suits a content owner when it comes to the technology they use and the workflows they employ. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, can you offer some guidance on how and when to make changes?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. As we've seen in the last few years, there's no shortage of desire to consume content. And that goes across age groups, geographical boundaries, streaming platforms. There's also a huge amount of viewer churn across all of these. The more content that you can deliver in the most diverse formats that you can, including languages, captions, and narrative, the better off you are. And again, we touched on AI. AI can certainly help with that, especially the languages, captions part of it.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, again, I don't want to take this for granted, but the strategy that's employed and how much content is involved will factor somehow into it does factor somehow into this equation, but that is sort of a moving target as prices fluctuate, like for instance, cloud prices where some of these tools might reside. Uh, any thoughts about
Yeah,
that?
yeah, certainly. And as well as, cloud, you look at some of the enabling technologies, right? So you want to do an investment in AI, generative AI, you know, where do you even start? It's not just a subscription to GPT-4 or Copilot. You have to kind of really look at what is being offered in the industry by vendors that are implementing AI tools that allow you to do this kind of stuff. And that generally sits in a cloud somewhere or as a service on top of what a cloud provider is already delivering for you, whether it's Google or AWS or Microsoft Azure. And it really does kind of make the equation a little bit more difficult to follow because, it's not like where you could sit back and say, if I have 10,000 hours of content and I need to convert that into another format, 10,000 hours of content, and I hire two people to do it, and they could do X number of clips per day, I can get it done in this number of months, and this is exactly what it's going to cost me. Today, you have to kind of start off and say, well, if I'm going to be hosting a solution and I'm going to be running it in AWS, am I going to go with reserved pricing or am I going to go with pay-per-use pricing, which means I might not get the availability that I want. So I have to look at the reserve pricing model. And then on top of that, well, what is the AI offering I'm going to use? And what is the subscription model of the vendor solution that's going to do this function for me? Is it a pay-per-use? Is it a monthly subscription? Is it a perpetual license with a support agreement? So it gets really, really complicated to kind of figure out what it'll actually cost you. And I think this is part of the immaturity of where we are so far with some of that technology transition to cloud and AI, is that each vendor has a solution or a product or some contribution that they can do here, but what's not standardized is a way to commercialize or to relay that pricing to the people who are going to consume it. So you get, if you're using 4 vendors, to provide a workflow or a solution and you ask them for pricing, you're likely going to get 8 to 12 different pricing options that you can for that solution. And, one's going to be a SaaS, one is going to be which includes a subscription, one's going to be a perpetual license, another's going to be a support agreement, and another one's going to be pay-per-use. And, then you have to figure out how you're going to rationalize between all the different vendors. So it is complicated.
Yeah, and not to make it even sound more complicated, but if AI is part of the equation, I'm guessing that you also have to factor in what the cost and availability will be of the GPUs that may be needed to power whatever the content owner is trying to accomplish in terms of repurposing content.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some big picture stuff there. What we've seen so far with cloud production is that many cloud solutions or platforms kind of require high-end GPU hosts. So if you were looking at running production on AWS, you'd need to go for a G4 or G5 host that you would kind of go for the highest spec one that you can. And they're expensive. And you, like I said earlier, you don't want to go with a pay-per-use model because there's no guarantee that that specific host will be available when you're doing your show or your production. So you need to kind of consider reserved pricing, which means there's a cost commitment. Not everything you do, especially with audio, requires AI. And the good thing with not requiring or working with audio and not requiring AI is that you don't need to have big GPUs. So you can run stuff on CPUs, and CPUs are inherently cheaper, or hosts with just powerful CPUs are inherently cheaper than hosts with powerful CPUs and powerful GPUs. So there's a cost savings, and depending on the function that you're doing and what's really required, you can strategically choose what type of host you want to run your solution on, which can introduce some cost savings. Now, if you do need AI, I suspect you'll have the cost of AI, which is kind of still up in the air with the cost of hosting that you'll have to reconcile. But one thing that history has shown us is that technology gets faster and cheaper over time. And I suspect the same thing will kind of follow with AI and AI type applications used in vendor tools.
Okay, Costa, so we've talked a lot before we get into the second half of our presentation here today, or second half of questions. I wanted to give you a chance to kind of summarize the the high points that you've made so far when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to maximizing the profitability of content and the impact on workflows in content preparation for different platforms. What should our viewers online focus on when they're considering these issues?
Yeah. Well, I've talked a lot so far. So this one I can actually summarize pretty quickly. So identify what you have, identify what you need to do with it to bring it up to spec, right? And then package as much metadata as you can to that content. In today's world, that's what's going to make the difference. Is the more metadata that you can associate with your bit of content, the more value it has longer term when whatever project requires a specific amount of content that may have this tag associated with it. It makes it findable and it makes it sellable.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about AI and machine learning. We've touched on it, but I'm interested,
Right.
speaking about it with respect to making content more searchable, which you've talked about, and enriching the metadata. What's your sense of how far along content owners are today with deploying these sorts of tools as they're seeking greater profits?
Right. Well, we're kind of right at the start. So AI promises to do a lot of things, and honestly, it's really exciting. Tagging metadata, creating multi-language captions and generative AI voices is amazing. So I live in Quebec, right? And I come from Greek parents. I grew up watching programs dubbed from English to French or English to Greek. And I can tell you that, the original English content, it's not quite the same when you're watching it in other languages, especially like, you look at, anything Star Trek, dubbed Patrick Stewart does not really sound like Captain Jean-Luc Picard as you would see on CBS. Or dubbed James Earl Jones does not sound like Darth Vader, when you're watching it in the kind of dubbed Greek content. So I think there's huge opportunities to make a lot of content relevant and better to generations of viewers. And I could talk for hours on this topic. Like I will walk into my young adult son's room, listening to some strange AI voice and see that what he's watching are these news clips or kind of like AI generated documentaries with AI voices. And it doesn't you can tell it's not a human being, but it's so close and it sounds so good that it's not quite that Stephen Hawking, computerized, barely legible sound that you're kind of trying to make out. These are almost human voices and getting better and better, especially with inflection and emotion over time. So obviously there's loads and loads of content out there that are coming in from different countries with different languages that can be dubbed, and AI could be a magnificent tool to kind of make that relevant to generations of viewers that were interested in kind of consuming that content.
Well, it sounds like AI and ML are delivering today on their promise, but also as you bring up, there's some a little bit strangeness in some of these documentaries that your son is watching with respect to
Yeah.
the audio and the way that it sounds. So
Yeah.
today, could you help guide us through what some of the, I'll call them gotchas or other items that might come along that maybe content owners aren't really expecting to encounter when they're hoping to use these tools to boost profitability?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of development yet to kind of be seen, and there's a lot of hype and promise today to live up to with AI, and what we see. The scope is phenomenal, right? Like the potential is really phenomenal. But I guess like anything, we'll need to learn what it's good at to start with, and over time learn and improve the things that it's not so good at, like putting inflection and emotion into voices, fixing some of the things with glitches and moving faces and stuff like that that you might see. And of course, it's not just us that'll be improving AI by its very nature should be improving itself. There should be a certain amount of learning in their own models. So it is really an interesting area to watch develop, and it will change the world.
Well, you mentioned Patrick Stewart, for instance, Jean-Luc Picard, and watching him in
Yeah.
another language. Uh, I was hoping you might be able to address where AI is in dealing with some of the more subtle aspects of content, whether it's audio, video, or video as relates to audio, or other things that might get glossed over a little bit that AI hasn't been trained or machine learning hasn't been trained yet to accommodate. Are there any things that are sticking out in your mind?
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. So today, I wouldn't trust AI to replace technical director in a live production, nor would I want AI to make creative decisions on content. Though I kind of really would love to see a version of Terminator from Skynet's perspective on humanity. I mean, that could be really fun. However, it would be great to get to the point that AI can grasp the concept of what it's processing, make decisions about what is part of the creative experience, and what might actually be a noise or a pop or a hum or an artifact, and remove that without changing a scene. So this is, for example, how you could use AI to improve content, but AI needs to be aware of what that content is so it doesn't change the meaning. For now, I think AI has a great place in augmenting the kind of automated delivery side of content. We talked a lot about creating, maybe different language versions, or, creating, tagging metadata and making your assets more valuable. So that's, I think, where it's really, really strong. And that's where I expect a lot to kind of be happening in the short term. And, maybe less so on the creative parts of it, but I wouldn't count that out either, at least not in the longer term.
Sure. Well, let's talk about something that has traditionally required human intervention, and that's quality control. Content owners may want to distribute across all these different viewing devices and may transcode to get their content on these different devices. But seems to me that that might introduce some challenges from a QC perspective, and I was wondering how is technology offering a solution?
Yep. So on the QC side of things, definitely there are more end platforms, more formats that you need to deliver based on size, bandwidth, and resolution, especially of the platforms you're delivering to. The more content you need to QC, obviously the more work that is and the more of a challenge. And you also need to kind of also look at how maybe backwards consumption in our industry are, especially in the sense that, you've probably got a 4-year-old smart TV or a 3-year-old smart TV running at home that is probably like a 60 or 70-inch set because it still looks great. But the power of that TV is significantly less than your 1-year-old iPhone or 2-year-old iPhone or Android device. Yet we expect we upgrade our TVs a lot less frequent than our phones, but the small device in your hand with tiny screen is probably more powerful than the big device that you're using at home. Yet visually, your eyes don't necessarily reconcile the resolution on your phone or the bit rate on your phone like they would on your smart TV. Yet when it comes to judging quality, we're still looking, most of us have a set that is older than the phone that we're using today. So what are some of the challenges when you're QCing content? I mean, you obviously have to start with, well, what is the best quality and best resolution, and making sure that we can deliver that, and then work down from there. And somewhere in between, you're going down to SD with stereo, or your 4K UHD with full immersive surround sound. The device that you're going to be watching it on is going to lie. And, you've got to make sure that content looks good there. So there's a lot of QC that has to happen today. And the end result might be on something that is much, much better than the prime viewing device that you're intending it for, but only this big. However, you've still got to QC all the different formats and make sure that they're acceptable.
And is that being automated these days with tools? And how effective are those tools? It is. Okay.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, generally what ends up happening is the tools will do a certain amount of, checking for content and checking for presence. But what you don't necessarily get is a standardized or uniform quality of experience level. And I think that's what's missing a little bit in some of the tools that exist today. I'd love it if there was something that, as we move forward, would allow us to track quality of experience. And, you do generally get that with, the applications that will run on a phone, or an application that will run on a fast stick or on a tablet. But they generally tend to phone home, right? It's not information that's open to the general public. If, the Hulu app will provide quality of experience data back to some server somewhere that someone will look at and determine, okay, well, for all the different IP addresses this hit, how did it behave? But I don't think there really is a standardized tool that will actually validate delivery across multiple platforms. And this is where, it could be interesting going forwards.
So I guess it's a given that in an ideal world, there would be no errors in any of this content that is repurposed for different platforms or different languages or whatever it happens to be. But we live in the real world, and maybe that's not the case. So I'm guessing that there's some relationship between the presence of errors versus cost on the distribution side. So in other words, how many errors, at what point are there so many errors that viewers tune out or and don't watch? And obviously that would have an impact on the profitability of that piece of content. And then you put that on one end, and then on the other side is, how much do these tools cost that can automate QC? Is that the way that it's playing out, and are those sorts of calculations being made by content owners? In other words, how many errors are tolerable before it affects the pocketbook?
We used to go for 5.9 support type contracts, for on-air time and things like, so that if there was black on air for more than whatever it is, like if you do the math and it comes down to 3 minutes a week, then there's recourse. Certainly when it comes to broadcasters, providing ad content, if the ads don't play, they have to make good or refund and provide that. But it's very different when it comes to consumers at home consuming content, and their experience not being great. They don't really get compensated. The only recourse they get is if they're using a cable provider, and the cable provider goes down, they get a certain cut on their subscription bill that month. But if they're streaming, or if they're picking stuff off air, then there's very little recourse that the consumer will get. Now, interestingly enough, that you have a few things and levers as a consumer that you can use, and that is obviously if you're watching on a subscription, application, churn, jump onto something else. If you don't like what you're watching on Prime, you can subscribe to Netflix, or you can subscribe to HBO, or you can subscribe to Peacock or Paramount Plus, or keep going. And then there's even the, let's call it even the more free versions that are based on subscription advertising, like, your Pluto TVs, or, if you buy a Roku. So, I guess really as a consumer, your course of action is, if you are not getting the quality level that you expect, you use a different platform, you use a different subscription. The metrics do get back to the content creators, especially on the app side of things. So they know when people have kind of not tuned in or not watched something, and they're not getting that, ad revenue, or they're not getting that shared revenue from an ad server that's providing the content and splicing it in. So they've got to basically either adapt and change, or, just face loss of revenue.
Do you think viewers are getting more demanding as the prices of TVs, whether they're 4K or 8K, the price of soundbars or home theater systems, all this continues to drop. And so more people have access to premium viewing experience. In other words, is there less room for content creators and distributors to compromise because more people want to have the best experience they possibly can have with the device that they just bought?
Yeah, I think so. Quality is definitely subjective. People are watching 4K movies on a 6-inch phone, but who's to say that it's not because they're getting better sound out of their phones and earbuds, right? As broadcasters deliver audio that provides a better experience, it might be an opportunity to get more eyeballs back to TVs instead of smart devices. And, I can tell you, like, I've got a great setup. Okay, now admittedly, my TV is a couple of years old, but I've got a Fire Stick onto it that has lots of different apps running. We've got a brand new sound bar and surround sound system. I love watching content that can take advantage of that. And I would rather watch content that takes advantage of that than something that might be a better narrative or story and delivered without that, kind of extra oomph that I enjoy, right? Now, of course, if you ask my wife, well, she'd be happy if she could just actually be able to understand the dialogue in a program, because, it's a whole different game of, I don't like the loud noise, but I want to hear what everyone's saying. But if I put the volume up, then the loud noise bothers me. And then I've got to watch TV with the captions on. So, when it comes to our content creators and, learning as far as what they need to do to deliver the best experience, I definitely feel that, there's opportunities to improve the experience that is a very, very personal experience to the viewer. And whether that's, better dialogue with dialogue intelligibility, or that is a better immersive or sound experience for those who want that, you've got to be able to kind of deliver on all of those things.
So Dan asks a question that's near and dear to my heart, because one of my favorite stories that I've written over the last 10 years or so, maybe even longer than that now, was the work that ABC O&Os did to find all their content that was on shelves and shelves of videotapes, video cassettes, and be able to actually use it. And that was, I found it very interesting. Dan's question is, what are your recommendations for those who still are storing videotapes? This gets back to the BAM thing, obviously, and content searchability, etc.
I would say if you're storing videotapes, you really do need to kind of ingest these into some form of digital format. Go for the highest resolution that you can. Again, if a lot of this stuff was broadcast and encoded as SD material, you're probably going to be looking at, an in-house format of 1080p. You want to be able to do kind of loudness and at least audio up mix to make it more relevant, at least to 5.1 or 7.1. And, choose a bit rate that obviously can go through multiple levels of re-encoding if you needed it to. And then as you're ingesting, I would really, focus on find the best tools to tag as much metadata as you can, because that content does have value. And it's just a matter of being able to make that value and that metadata searchable for someone who's looking for that content.
Right. I just remember when I wrote that story all those years ago, these AI tools were not present, and all they had were little slips of paper inside the video
Yeah,
cassette that identified just a few little things about a newscast or something that was in there. And they actually were
that's it.
taking pictures of it and making JPEGs and associating that. And then, but now obviously you can run this content through these AI tools and use all these, great tools to be able to identify what's in on there and identify content on a frame basis, basically, I guess.
Yeah.
So
You know,
anyway,
if you and
thanks for that question, Dan. I really like that. Yeah.
yeah,
Go
and
ahead. I'm
Dan,
sorry to
I
interrupt you.
almost always look at masking tape and I think of it as the original delivery format for metadata. So,
Right. Right.
whether it was on screens, on monitors, on tapes, you got to think that we've come a long way.
Sure. Okay, back to the list here. Where will content owners and distributors find savings when it comes to handling the added workflow requirements to reach viewers on a variety of viewing devices? Again, this is sort of a summary question, but take it away.
Yeah. And I think generally it's by automating the delivery process. This drives the cost per asset down. In addition, with better management of metadata, giving that content more ability to be monetized at some point in the future. That's really the best play to get savings and value from content. Now, what works best for each customer is really down to the customer, their timescales, and their appetite for CapEx, OpEx, SaaS, or whatever flavor of depreciation versus overhead suits them financially best, right? The reality is that keeping your options open to whether it's a hybrid approach of having stuff on-prem and in the cloud, or in private cloud, or just specifically public. I mean, that approach is really up to the client and what their kind of financials and appetite for spend is. And every organization has a slightly different approach to it. Personally, I think the one that is going to make the most sense, especially for vendors, is to be able to provide solutions that can be run on-prem on a customer's compute, and also can be hypervised and run in the cloud for kind of spillover requirements that would happen during off-peak kind of load, right? But honestly, this is kind of a developing market and developing technologies. Even though people have been talking, cloud and AI for years now, who's to say that in 2 decades it won't be so cheap that there's no point in kind of running your own data centers and your own cloud. So the future is really going to dictate the direction that these technologies will take. As vendors, our goal is to deliver them on whatever platform we can to accommodate our customers' needs.
Okay, here's another question from Kylie, and maybe you can address this in about a minute or two. Kylie wants to know, have you seen any examples of AI being used in targeted advertising?
Ooh, I guess it depends kind of what you mean by that. I mean, AI to a certain degree is constantly being used when it comes to building a kind of personal stream of information, whether you're getting that from social media, whether you're getting that from your broadcaster or your ad server, and that's the interesting thing with over-the-top TV is commercials that you're receiving are personalized to things that there is an associated ID and metadata about your personal interests. So if you, for example, use a news service, when you load the app, it asks you, what are you interested in? What are some of the, do you like automotive? Do you like cooking programs? Do you like this? Do you like that? And then funnily enough, the ads that you get are catered around some of the questions that you've received. Now, you also have the beauty of certain apps and organizations being able to share data between apps, and that might be your shopping app and your player app. And I'm not going to tell you a company that, oh well, they can deliver to your home and they also provide video streams and all of that stuff, so they know exactly what you're interested in. So AI is constantly being used to create a profile of content that would be interesting to you as a viewer. So that's being done today all the time. Now, as far as AI doing generative content, we're just seeing the beginnings of that, and it'll be really interesting to see how it evolves.
Okay, in the last minute or so, why don't you tell us a little bit about how TELUS Alliance is addressing the desire to get bigger profits, greater profits from content that content owners have?
Right. Well, again, thank you for this is the opportunity for me to be self-serving in my messaging. We have solutions like Audio Tool Server that enhance, process, and integrate into whatever media asset management solutions customers are currently using. It also allows for fully manual workflows, automated workflows, whatever you really need. It allows their existing workflow to rejuvenate or enhance their assets and scales from something that is incredibly affordable to something that can be hosted with high availability across multiple geos in a distributed cloud solution. So it can run at an enterprise level if you need it to. We're also implementing AI technologies to enhance its capabilities on both the augmenting and delivery and quality side of it. So that's three things, not both, but on the augmenting, delivery, and quality side of things. And then finally, we also have tools for immersive audio authoring, which really have a huge impact on the personalization and impact of how audio is delivered, kind of in the near future with next generation audio. So ultimately making content more valuable for, the content creator, and more interesting and more personable for the person that's consuming it. And you can, go onto our website, www.telusalliance.com. And if you're interested in our television solutions under TV, you can get a really good understanding of what these are. And again, I think my details are going to be delivered as part of this webcast. You can always reach out to me and I'd be happy to provide more information.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Costa Nichols for being here. Before we wrap up, it's time for our grand prize winner sweepstakes. And today's winner of a $250 Amazon gift card is Gwen Crutcher from Alabama. Our team will be in touch after the webinar, Gwen. A couple of last things. Be sure to download all the handouts as well as check out my articles and those of my colleagues at tvtech.com. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.